today's episode of PJ and the Beard, I'm still on my ultimate field trip, and I'm near Nashville at an undisclosed location with my good friend Brodie Hutchins, who has been kind enough to go through his guitar collection, and it's a collection simply in the fact that he has not sold them, not because he considers himself a serious collector, but he's going to go through his acoustic guitar collection that will have some brands that you were very familiar with. So Brodie, why don't you tell us about your guitars?
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me on PJ and the Beard. Fan, watch it all the time, chime in on live things. I'm usually that second guy that's making comments in there. So love it. Let's start from back and go forward. I got to pull this out, and let me just say Ovation. And back in the day, man, they were the Taylor guitar. You know what Taylor guitars, were to worship guys. Ovations were to all the guys, and Glenn Campbell was playing them early on, one of the early endorsees, and then in the 80s when all those bands each had their ballad, they were usually playing an Ovation, Wanted Dead or Alive and that kind of stuff. Boston's, every kid picked up and wanted to play More Than a Feeling, even though that was recorded on a Guild, I think. Everybody seemed to have a 12-string. An Ovation rather, but this guitar was my dad's, and it's one of the early ones. The serial number is like 481, and this has been back to the factory like 3 times. The first time my dad bought it in 1974 or something. It was really early. In fact, this was inlaid. If you look at, there aren't many of them left anymore because the plastic holds up, but the wood doesn't. So usually they're gone by now, but he sent it away in the mid-70s, a year or so after he bought it, and to get a pickup put in it. And when it came back, it had this stamp on it, which they had gone to then for production. And I remember him telling me he was really upset, like he loved that inlay. So he played it pretty heavily through the 70s in a band that he was in with some other music heroes of mine, a band they called themselves Liberty. And Ovations, if you had an Ovation and the custom tuck and roll stuff, it's like you were legit then. And but just the other day, Pat and I were in a local music shop here, and I got to play one of Glenn Campbell's actual Ovations.
We'll post a picture, and maybe I think I got a real quick video. Maybe we'll throw that in this. I'll have the Beard edit that in because I don't do anything. I'm the eye candy.
On the back side of the camera?
That's right.
So,
this is my best side. You kidding me?
He's got a face for radio.
That's right.
So anyway, but ironically, this still sounds really great for being a plastic guitar. It sounds good, and got to play a thing a couple of years ago with one of my favorite singers on the planet, Rick Florian, and he did they call it Guitars and Gumbo thing, and he's a huge America fan, and we played like 3 or 4 America songs. So what better, I think Dan Peake was playing those back in the day. So I restrung this and busted it out, and it's sentimental, and for sure. But I'm not going to walk into a gig with that unless it's time specific. And then this is mine from the 80s. I actually wanted one. They made a Thunderbolt one, which tells you what year it might have been, 85 or so. And I remember Kevin Cronin from REO Speedwagon had one with the lightning bolts. I'm like, oh, that looks awesome. I want one of those. So we went to the music store, and my dad specifically was just real happy that I wanted to get an acoustic guitar, and I wouldn't, I think for him it was like, all right, after 8 o'clock he could play that and not the, things that made it sound like the cat was caught in the door. And so we went down to look at one of those Thunderbolt things, and I picked it up, and I said, this sounds pretty awful, but it looks cool. And my dad goes, well, what about that one over there? And that's when they were going to these real thin bodies with the pickups on them, and you could plug it into a PA, and it sounded really good. And anyway, long story short, he talked me into getting this one, but I was proud of the fact that even then I didn't buy what looked good. I bought what sounded good, speaking relatively from a lightning bolt versus this, so it's not like this.
I'm going to prove that point when he said things that sounded good and didn't look good. This is featured on the electric guitar part of this show, but this was the before 8 p.m. guitar that was rocking the household.
Oh my. I am proud of that era. So, Anyway, you know, Ovations were still really cool then. And then, but not long after that, I became, you know, I love old Gibsons and old Martin acoustic guitars, but there's this practical vein of things. You know, back then, 70s and 80s were really the Ovations, and then, you know, Taylors came on, and guys were geeking out over them. And I think Taylor did a number of things brilliantly, and I won't get into all that as far as marketing and their, you know, environmental responsibility and how they marketed things, but also their experimentation with woods and shapes and things like that. Whereas, you know, to be honest, Martin kind of dug their heels in, and they probably erred a little too much on the preserving the history rather than going forward. They've caught up since then now, but they're still, you know, Bob Taylor, and, you know, just did some great things. So I look at these, you know, here's just a 355 CE 12 string that when I need a 12 string, I take it out and it does its job. I got this one. I was, you know, was kind of a fan. I think everything that Sunburst is great, but I bought this sight unseen on the internet, and when it showed up, you know, at that point, when I bought it, I don't know what it was, 15 years ago or so. The one thing about Taylors, you knew if you walked in somewhere and if there were 10 of them on the wall, at least 8 of them were good, and there were a handful of great ones. Whereas if, you know, at the time, if you walked in and there were a batch of Martins on the wall, you probably only had 2 of them that felt good and were already set up really well and so on. But so I was comfortable buying this one. I got a screaming deal on it and played it, and it sounded to me, you know, with the maple back and sides, it was like an SJ200 kind of guitar. So it was sort of the working man's version of that. And I took it out and played it quite a bit. My dear friend Chris Klug, who sings in our band and is a killer rhythm guitar player, you know, sort of favors this one too. So he's played it quite a bit.
I've done my fair strumming with that guitar.
That's
too.
right. Yeah,
that's a great guitar.
I don't know if this picks up on the camera, but it's still going.
Goes to 11.
It's still going. And let me do this one as well. You know, I'm not, you know, a big fan of like, oh, you know, so-and-so has a new signature model out, you know, for that reason. But a lot of my heroes, you know, music heroes have a story, and the things they want in an instrument end up being a lot of the same things I would look for, which is why I'm a fan in the first place. A couple of things, you know, early on playing, there was an artist, Stephen Curtis Chapman, because I was really influenced by a lot of early Christian music. And, you know, I saw him with Whiteheart open up in 1987 or so, something like that, and just became a big fan of his and followed him over the years. And on a lot of levels, they, you know, adopted kids, and we've got a special, you know, connection there with adoption and knowing what that's like. But about I guess it's been 9 or 10 years ago, one of their daughters was killed tragically, and in fact, I was here in Nashville when that hit the news, and I remember hearing about it, and I was just devastated to hear. But not long after that, Bob Taylor had approached Stephen Curtis Chapman about coming out with a signature model, and, you know, and I didn't know what it was going to sound like or look like or anything, but I met up with a guy at a shop back in D.C. and Pennsylvania area who was a Taylor dealer, and asked him if they were going to be able to get one in. He said, yeah, I could get one. And so anyway, long story short, ordered it in, and I really didn't care what it. Well, I wanted one because he was such just probably loved his heart more than his music on stuff. But anyway, it came out, and they had some appointments in here that commemorated their daughter, and one was a picture that she drew, and there's a story. You got to read the book and hear all of this. So this guitar is really special in that way. But acoustically, it's, you know, I recorded it on. Let's hope it's in tune. Sorta. And don't know if that picks up well, but it's got a real soft, woody sound, and we recorded quite a bit with it acoustically. Now, when you plug it in, this expression system,
Not your favorite.
it doesn't express me. So I got a chance actually to meet Steven and had him sign it, which was pretty special too. I think they only made 80 or so of them, 85. I don't know exactly how many. There's a funny story about this one as well. There was a guy that ran sound for us with a company up in Pennsylvania, and he bought this guitar to take a class when he was going to school, and then sold it right away. And before he got ready to sell it, he had asked me, he goes, "Hey, are you interested in buying this nylon string?" And I never played it, and I thought, nah, not really, but I appreciate it, man. Steve Kunkel, actually. Killer sound guy. And a couple of years later, I walked into a music store in Pennsylvania, and I saw it hanging there, and I picked it up, and I was just, started to play. I'm sure nylon string won't be in tune, so I'm going to not even do that. But I picked it up off the wall and started playing, and I thought, man, this sounds really, really good. Which, again, being a tailor, my expectations, for whatever reason, are a little different than when I pick up an old Martin or an old Gibson. But it sounded amazing. In fact, I play this at home all the time, but just maple back and sides, and I think it's a cedar top, but it's the NS5 Series 54, so that, typical Taylor body style that they came out with. Sounds amazing plugged in, and I told my wife about it. I said, I found this guitar, and then in the meantime, I texted Steve, and I said, hey, what is this your guitar? And I told him where I found it. He goes, yeah, it's in that store. So I ended up probably paying the store owner a few bucks, and I could have just bought it from Steve, but that'll teach you to sit and wait around. So I love it, and my wife surprised me on my 40th birthday with it years ago. And anyway, next, here was my ease into the Martin thing. It's not a real Martin, it's a Shenandoah, so the back and the sides are laminated, but my dear friend Pat turned me on to Martins, and especially D35s and especially Sunburst, because he always talked about one that his youth group, or a friend from his church or his youth group leader, someone had, that he ended up getting, his parents bought for him. And I found this for a steal of a price and bought it and set it up and put a pickup in it. And these have gone up in value, quite a bit. And by quite a bit, I don't know, I think I paid $500 for it, and they're probably going for $1,000 or so. But I'm not going to hang on to this one because they were made, I think, with epoxy. So if anything structural ever happens to it, that's going to be a disaster to try to get taken apart. But I say that, but probably, my grandkids will still have it. Who knows? So I've taken to Germany and had it Haiti. It's one of those, if anything ever happens to it, it wouldn't bother me.
It's a pretty nice campfire guitar.
Yeah, that's really what I used it for. This is my first, it's not really a vintage guitar. I don't know when vintage starts quantitatively, but like I said, I love Martins, and I love old guitar shops, and there's, Chris Delaporta's Woodshed Guitar Works up in Carlisle. I still check in with him and check his website, and I saw this on there one day, and I phoned him up quick and I said, hey Chris, what's the deal on that 18? And in the same breath I said, does it have the blue case too? Every Martin you buy has got to have the blue case with it. He goes, yeah man, it does, it's good. And I said, does it sound like yours? Because I knew he's got a 60, I think it's a 66 D18. And Chris is great because he and I like a lot of the same things. He's a slim taper 60s guy, but I'm a fat 50s neck on a Gibson. But we both kind of are into that same thing. So I had a point of reference, and he picked it up. He goes, yeah. He goes, it's cleaner than mine, and I think it sounds just as good. And then, of course, Pat goes in there a lot, and I asked Pat, I said, hey, there's a D18 in there. Are you going to Chris's anytime soon? He goes, yeah. So he phoned me up, or he went in and played it, and I'm sure he went like this. and then and just listened. And then
all mandatory when you pick up a Martin.
Exactly.
And then I saw the blue Steel Me case. And
all bets are off. So
gotta go.
So Pat's like, yeah, you need this one. So they sent it. I said, okay, and so I got it. And I'm kind of a sucker for things being birth years, and unfortunately I was born in an era of gear not being very cool at all. So, but it's a 73 D18, which is everything about a great dreadnought, and especially an 18 with the mahogany on it. It's got the V-neck, which I really like, so it's got to get a pickup put in it, and I'm going to take it out and play it, make it kind of a practical guitar. Here's one I've always wanted. Pat and I have gone to guitar shows for years up in Philly. We call it the Philly, I think it was actually Valley Forge, but we call it the Philly Guitar Show. And we go up, and it's just overwhelming, everything you saw. But Martin, for a number of years, would come out with a commemorative thing or a special edition thing. And one year, I think it was for a year, it might have spanned a couple of years, but they came out with a veterans model that was designed by one of their employees to honor veterans. And I love guitars, but I love veterans even more than that, and just a real soft spot, and just mad respect for our service military men and women. And I had to have one, and I had looked for years, and then found one. It was a music store in New Jersey, I think. I found it online, and it sounds good too. I just around any of the veteran type holidays, I'll try to break it out and play it. And there's always somebody with a navy blue hat of so and so veteran or whatever that'll come up, and just again, I can't say enough about our service men and women, and love it. The only thing better than that is guitars and them. So the Workhorse, I bought this, I forget what year it was. No, I don't. I lied to you. I bought it in 2001 because when I knew we were having our daughter, who was born in 2002, I was sort of whining around about, I'll never get a Martin, I can't afford one, anyway, ended up figuring out a way to do it, and I thought, I got to do this before kids come along or I'll never do it. So
you can see how kids have stymied the collecting of guitars.
My wife was right. She said, would you shut it? You'll be fine.
If you don't believe me, just look at the other segment where we covered the electric guitar.
She's always
He used
right.
his children as excuses to buy guitars. He's brilliant.
So, marketing, So anyway, as much, and call me what you want, which has been a lot of different things, but, these, I still sort of chuckle at these signature model things, yet I own a number of them, and a couple of them are Eric Clapton things, but again, it's not because his name's on it, it's because the things he liked about it were the things that inspired me and the same things that I wanted to have. So as much as D28s and dreadnoughts are great, I've always loved the triple O guitars, because one, I like small body guitars, but the scale of this is shorter than a dreadnought, so it's a little easier to get in and really sort of it's looser. You don't have to work it as hard. But on this, it's got the scallop bracing in it, which I really liked, and it just sort of bounced around, a lot more than the standard one. So I ordered this from Musician's Friend. Big mistake at the time, by the way, because I ordered it, and the first one came, and I hated it. It had looked like little specks of stain kind of dripped on here. And it just didn't sound great. It didn't feel good. So I took them up on that exchange offer, and they shipped this one. And as soon as I got it, it was good. And I had to go have it set up to make it great. But bone saddle and a bone nut, and this is my go-to. I've had different pickups in it over the years, but I sit around the house with this one and that nylon string and play it. I really like that one. I'd like to have a shaded top one sometime, too, but,
You know somebody who has one, which is the segue to the next guitar.
Yes.
This was which one is not like the others guitar. If you notice, there's at least a Noah's Ark version of Ovations, a cluster of Taylors, a gaggle of Martins, and then you have this beauty here.
This
That's a fantastic guitar. I know I shouldn't be talking behind the camera.
No, do it. You're more knowledgeable.
It's a fantastic guitar.
You know about all these fancy ones more than I do.
I just know when you bought it and I came over and played it, I'm like, what?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it's almost too purty to strum. But I got to become pals with one of my heroes down here named Gordon Kennedy, who played in White Hart, and I was such a fan of his playing, his songwriting, and then when he peeled off and went to play with with Garth Brooks and about every big country act he was with, and then obviously his big sort of ta-da moment was the Clapton song "Change the World," and so I had always followed his career, and when we were recording back in 2010 or so, I got to meet him while we were playing, and have just become acquaintances, pals. We'll meet up and grab lunch and just be gearheads. But a couple of years ago, he shot me a note and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling this. I know you kind of geek out over these small body guitars. Are you interested?" And when I saw that it was a Lowden, that now goes into a whole different bracket of like boutique stuff that I turn and run from, because I'm afraid of it. One, I can't afford it, and two, I'm afraid of it as far as am I going to be able to play it and enjoy it like I do something else. But this one is it's not only is it small and it's maple, but it's a bit of a custom order as far as appointments, but it's an S35, which I think is still a production model for them, but with maple, sides and back. And I mean, that back, I don't know what angle I'm getting here, it's just amazing. And it's quite a comfy guitar to just sit in the chair and play and fall asleep to watching TV. Not big and boomy, but it really pokes through. So he had said, yeah, he cut me a deal on it. Goes, yeah, I need to get a couple other things, and I may liquidate that one. So I ended up buying it from him, and so this one I'm a little afraid of because it's a boutique-y thing, but it was used on the Chris Gaines record. On 3 or 4 of the songs on there, and some other recordings too that they had used. So there's some legit, musical history and lineage that goes on with that Gordon had played on those. But specifically that Chris Gaines record that was, I think technically not successful, even though it sold a couple of million copies. But it was to be a soundtrack for a movie that never happened. But
and for those of you listening, Chris Gaines is Garth Brooks' alter ego, much like Hannah Montana is Miley Cyrus.
Exactly, and like Derek from Derek and the Dominoes is Eric.
So I think there's 2 more instruments here on the acoustic stop, which also is a walk down memory lane.
And Sentimental Lane.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are custom builds. My grandfather, who is still with us at the ripe young age of 95, sold his machine shop when he was 93, and since then has sort of taken up guitar building as a way to keep him busy. And a couple of years ago, he looked up on the internet. He's on Facebook. He's 95 and he's on Facebook. It's just, man, I love that guy. And so he's doing research and building these things, and he gave this to me. He goes, "Hey, I made a cigar 3-string guitar for you." So I have it here, and it's quite fun. You can do DGD or something like that, but just in fact, he'll say, "Where can I get some strings?" He built everything else, but there's not really a convenient place to get strings up there. And then the other year, in 2016, for Christmas, he made me this lap steel, and he had done all the research, and the American flag on there, made in America. And of course, brass all over his shop, so he's able to make the the nut and the saddle and the little grommets for the strings to go through, and then the little corners. But I mean, chunk of walnut, made the handle, and got a pickup, and it sounds pretty good. You know, this little pickup, I plug it into an amp and bang away on it. It's pretty amazing. But even if it didn't sound great, it's just he made it, and that's the cool thing. And then also, you know, with the pedal, see, I remember him asking me about the slides and the differences in them, but he also made a slide for it too. That's walnut, and he's got glued to a piece of steel, and then this is routed so you can do this or wait, whichever way you want to do it. But it was just it's great. He made it, and he's got his initials on the end. He put my initials on that end, and then he also machined one out of brass for me. I can just, I told him about how long I like them sort of shorter, just on a knuckle like that. So he made this one too. So people, guitar stuff and coffee, that's the way to get me at a holiday. So especially with, my grandfather. So these are both Harold Kramer originals, and I'm so happy to. In fact, here's another non-guitar related thing. I just saw this as I panned over. These drumsticks are also from Harold Kramer. When he was in high school, he played in marching band. If you start doing some math, he's 95 now and had these in high school. These are Gretsch, what's it say on here? Gretsch Belson model. But I mean, these are 80-year-old drumsticks, and one's warped about as much as my sense of humor.
It's not bent in half. That's not that bad.
Yeah, but so anyway, it's just really another cool thing with my grandfather as well.
So in closing, you're talking about things that are gifts. Why don't you grab that mug over there and hold it up when I'm doing my outtake here, because back at home, the beard shamelessly rocks his Yeti mug, and so we had to have a mug on the show, so Brodie's holding the mug up against his mug. But with that, if you like what you hear, we're talking about gear, right? And this was a special moment for a guy who loves gear, that you can see it's woven through who he is as a person and connected with his family. And we hope you enjoy it, and we hope you subscribe to our channel. And if you like stuff like this, join the journey. Maybe have a conversation about, your favorite instrument, or if you have a family connection to some of your gear, that'd be fantastic. But the beard is back at home. While I'm enjoying this boondoggle here, but this is PJ on behalf of the beard, reminding you, no matter what you hear, you never have too much gear. Shalom.